The Mixteca Puebla will succeed the Zapotec, another group in Mexico. And they're known for having a high level of artistic achievement, known for a number of different artistic items. For example, pottery, goldsmithing, and mosaic. And we don't tend to think of mosaic in Mesoamerica, but it is a very common form. All of these forms will be looked up to throughout Mesoamerica. Just like in Europe, we see painting as this great form, but we don't see it in other places. Every society will attach itself to specific forms of art, and in this case, mosaic, goldsmithing, and pottery happen to be the highest forms of art as they see it. But we're actually going to be looking at their form of a book, in this case, the Borgia Codex. And this is one of 3 remaining Mayan books, or really pre-Aztec books, to remain. It recorded history, astronomy, calendar cycles, maps, and tribute accounts. We see hieroglyphic columns, which were read from left to right and top to bottom. The whole thing is designed with an accordion fold, unlike a typical European codex, which would be bound on one side and then you would have the individual pages. Here we have this accordion fold, basically a scroll that's folded rather than rolled. At least that's the easiest way to kind of think of it. Now, most of these books will be destroyed by the Spanish. The reason is there's a deep religiosity that runs through many of these books, and the Spanish are really concerned, especially after 1521 when they're focusing on conversion. They're concerned that these people will go back to their pagan ways. They're concerned with the brutality of their religion, and so they will destroy everything they can find of that religion to force the conversion to Christianity. When making these books or codices, they will use typically deerskin coated with lime plaster. And the piece we're looking at is actually from the northern highlands of Mexico. What we're looking at is a specific scene, or I want to look at a specific scene. Here we see the god of war and Quetzalcoatl back to back in the Borgia Codex, or the Codex Borgia. The two gods are richly colored, and this is a very typical pattern for the period and for these codices in two-dimensional art in Mesoamerica. In very typical form, what they will do is they create flat planes of color with a very linear design. So there is no attempt at modeling, there is no three-dimensionality, but yet we have something very, very complex, very similar to the arabesque form, for example, in the Islamic world. And these flat planes of color will be broken up as much as possible, adding more and more detail. Quetzalcoatl, the one on the right here, is wearing a human mask. And we know he's wearing a human mask. Of course, Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent, but here coming off as human, the god of death in the skull, which is very symbolic of that, with a blade in front of him. That's the red and white that he's got balancing basically on his nose. Beneath them is an inverted skull representing the underworld. To the Mesoamericans, this symbolizes life itself, the necessity of war and death for the continuation of life. To them, sacrifice is a necessary part of the cycle of life. Just like we frequently teach children that, for example, plants must die to create more fertile soil so that more plants can grow. The same principle applies here. Humans must die so that more humans can grow. We must appease the gods in various forms. And around the sides, we actually see the ritual calendar. And so these are the symbols associated with numbers for that ritual calendar. So you have, for example, skull, blade, rabbit, or this one is rabbit at the top, all the way down. So they might have, 2 reeds, 3 monkey, etc. And this dating calendar is that short ritual calendar that would repeat a number of times throughout the year. And it's also going to be key when you look at these pieces because it tells us that this is a religious image, because we're seeing that ritual calendar used rather than some of the more typical calendars that they might use, or even the long count, which might give us some indication that this is a historical event. Of course, gods dancing on the underworld is not generally a historical event, but you get the idea.